Imagine walking along a muddy riverbank when suddenly you see a fish. Not swimming, not floating, walking. It pushes itself across the ground with its fins, leaves the water behind, and moves through the mud like it belongs there. Sounds impossible, right? But this isn't a science fiction creature. It's real. And some fish have developed astonishing ways to survive outside the water. Today, we're going to discover the fish that can walk on land. Why it leaves the water, and how a fish can survive in a world that seems completely wrong for it. And by the end, you'll understand why scientists say some fish are much more adaptable than we ever imagined. Meet the mudskipper. At first glance, it looks like an ordinary fish, but watch it carefully, and you'll notice something very strange. It can move across land. Mudskippers are amphibious fish that spend a significant amount of time outside the water, especially around muddy coastal habitats. Instead of using their fins only for swimming, they can use their strong pectoral fins to push and move themselves across the mud. It's almost like watching a fish walk. But there's an even bigger question. How can a fish breathe when it's not underwater? For most fish, leaving the water is extremely dangerous. Fish normally use their gills to extract oxygen from water. Take them out of the water, and their gills can no longer work normally. But mudskippers have special adaptations that allow them to survive on land for extended periods when conditions are suitable. They can absorb oxygen through their skin and the lining of their mouth and throat, as long as those surfaces remain moist. That's why you'll often find them in damp, muddy environments. They're not simply breathing air like we do. They're using a combination of adaptations that let them survive between two worlds, water and land. But if you're a fish, why leave the water at all? The answer is surprisingly simple: food. Mudflats and mangrove environments are filled with tiny organisms, insects, worms, and other potential meals. By moving onto land, mudskippers can exploit food sources that many other fish can't reach. And there's another advantage. Getting out of the water can sometimes help them avoid aquatic predators. So instead of being trapped in one environment, mudskippers can move between them. They're not just surviving outside the water, they're taking advantage of it. And here's where things get even stranger. Mudskippers don't simply crawl around randomly. They can climb, they can jump, they can defend territory. And some species even use their fins to move surprisingly quickly across muddy surfaces. Their eyes are positioned high on their heads, which is useful when they're partially submerged or moving across mud. They can look around while keeping much of their body close to the surface. Imagine having the ability to swim like a fish, then climb onto land, look around, and move across the mud. For a fish, that's an incredible lifestyle. Mudskippers are especially associated with intertidal environments. These are places where the ocean repeatedly disappears and returns with the tides. When the tide comes in, the mudflats become underwater habitats. When the tide goes out, large areas are exposed. For most fish, that's a problem. Skippers, it's an opportunity. They can remain active on the exposed mud while other fish are forced to retreat with the water. It's almost like evolution gave them a special advantage for living between the ocean and the shore. But here's something that makes mudskippers even more fascinating. They need to keep their bodies moist. That means they can't simply wander anywhere they want. They are still dependent on their watery environment. Some mudskippers also maintain water inside their burrows. These burrows can provide shelter from predators, help them survive changing conditions, and give them a moist environment when they're away from open water. So even though they can walk on land, they haven't completely escaped the ocean. They're living on the boundary between two worlds. Not exactly. Mudskippers are among the most famous examples of fish that can move across land. But they're not the only fish capable of unusual movement outside water. Some fish can use their fins to push themselves across surfaces. Others can survive of water for surprisingly long periods. And there are even fish that can move between isolated pools when their habitat dries out. Evolution has produced several different solutions to the same problem. How do you survive when your underwater world disappears? For some fish, the answer was simple: learn to move. Fish walking on land might sound like a strange biological trick, but it tells us something much bigger about evolution. Life isn't always restricted to the environment where it began. When conditions change, animals can develop new ways to survive, and over millions of years, those adaptations can completely transform the way an animal lives. The mudskipper gives us a glimpse of what that transition can look like: a fish slowly becoming better adapted to life beyond the water. And scientists believe that the evolution of land dwelling vertebrates involved ancient fish with adaptations that helped them cope with shallow water and land environments. The creatures that eventually gave rise to today's land vertebrates were part of a much larger evolutionary story. And it all began in a world dominated by water. So the next time you see a fish, don't assume it belongs entirely underwater, because somewhere along a muddy coastline, a fish may be climbing out of the water, moving across the mud, and living a life that seems impossible. A fish that can walk. And perhaps the strangest part is this: the ocean may not have just created animals that live in water. It may have also helped create the animals that eventually conquered the land. What do you think? Could you imagine seeing a fish walking towards you on a beach? Tell us in the comments. And if you want to discover more incredible creatures hiding beneath the surface, subscribe. Because the ocean is full of animals that can do things you never thought possible.